December 25th, 1989. Târgoviște, Romania. Inside a cold room at a military garrison, a man and a woman face a makeshift court. The sound of distant, sporadic gunfire is the only backdrop. The trial will last less than an hour. The sentence is already decided. How does a quarter century of absolute power end against a brick wall? What is said in the last minutes when the charges are read? And what happens when the cameras filming history are too slow to capture the final moment? This is the story of the final day of Nicolae and Elena Ceaușescu. For 24 years, Nicolae Ceaușescu was the conductor, the leader of socialist Romania. His rule, enforced by the feared Securitate secret police, built a cult of personality that placed him and his wife Elena at the center of national life. By the 1980s, his policies of brutal austerity, designed to pay off foreign debt, had led to economic collapse and widespread misery. On December 16, 1989, a protest in Timișoara ignited a revolution. 5 days later, Ceaușescu's final speech in Bucharest was met with open rebellion. On December 22nd, they fled the capital by helicopter, only to be captured hours later. They were now prisoners at Military Unit 01417 in Târgoviște. The new government, the National Salvation Front, feared loyalist Securitate forces would try to rescue them. A decision was made in Bucharest. There would be a trial, and it would be today. Christmas Day, their journey to this garrison had been a frantic, 72-hour descent from absolute power to total irrelevance. After fleeing the rooftop of the Central Committee building on December 22nd, their pilot, Lieutenant Colonel Vasile Maluțan, landed near the Snagov Palace. They soon abandoned the helicopter and proceeded by car, hijacking several vehicles at gunpoint. Near the town of Târgoviște, they were recognized and detained by local police. They were first held at the Inspectorate for Militia, where they were jeered by angry crowds. Fearing the building would be stormed, the local authorities moved them under heavy guard to the greater security of the nearby military garrison, a compound surrounded by high walls and barbed wire. For 3 days, they lived in a small and sparse officer's room, sleeping on 2 metal-framed beds. Their guards, soldiers of the Romanian army, were terrified. Rumors swirled constantly that thousands of elite Securitate troops, fanatically loyal to Ceaușescu, were preparing a full-scale assault on the base to rescue their leader. The garrison commander, Colonel Andrei Chemenici, placed his unit on the highest alert, reinforcing sentry posts and ordering his men to sleep with their weapons. Inside, the Ceaușescus remained defiant. Nicolae tried to give orders to the soldiers guarding him. Elena complained incessantly about the conditions, the food, the lack of respect. They could not comprehend that their authority had vanished. Meanwhile, in Bucharest, the National Salvation Front, led by Ion Iliescu, was fighting to consolidate its power. The national television station was the nerve center of the revolution, broadcasting chaotic scenes of street fighting. Figures appeared on screen announcing that terrorists, presumed to be Securitate agents, were attacking key buildings, poisoning the water supply, and slaughtering civilians. This atmosphere of panic, much of which was later revealed to be exaggerated, created intense pressure to eliminate the Ceaușescus. The new leaders believed that as long as the dictator was alive, his loyalists would have a cause to fight for. The fighting would not stop until he was gone. The decision to hold a trial and execution was made late on December 24th. It was a political calculation. The architect of the plan was General Victor Stănculescu, a man who, just days earlier, had been Ceaușescu's defense minister. After being ordered to crush the Timișoara protests, Stănculescu had feigned a leg injury to avoid carrying out the command, a pivotal act of betrayal that helped cripple the regime's response. Now, with cold military precision, he set about organizing its final chapter. On the morning of December 25th, General Stănculescu began the preparations. He was the architect of this final act. At the Boteni Air Base, he ordered the selection of 8 elite paratroopers. They were told only that they were going on a mission of exceptional national importance. Their commander, Captain Ionel Boru, was 31 years old. He checked their weapons, standard-issue PMMD, 63 assault rifles, a Romanian variant of the AK-47. Each man carried 2 magazines, 60 rounds in total. They did not know their target. Boru selected his best men, including Sergeant Major Doran Marian Sirlin and Gorgon Octavian. They were professional soldiers, trained for difficult missions, but this was something else entirely. Simultaneously, a judicial team was assembled in Bucharest. The chief military prosecutor, Jica Popa, was chosen to lead the prosecution. The presiding judge was Colonel Ioan Nistor, assisted by Major Gheorghe Popescu and Captain Corneliu Sorescu. 2 defense lawyers were appointed, Nicolae Teodorescu and Constantin Lucescu. They were summoned and given no time to consult with their clients or review any evidence. Their role was a formality in a process designed for speed, not justice. Teodorescu would later claim he tried to save their lives by arguing for life imprisonment. But the transcript shows a lawyer who seemed to accept his client's guilt from the outset. Around 11:30 in the morning, 2 Puma helicopters with the number designations 203 and 247 lifted off from the Ghencea military stadium in Bucharest. They flew low, just above the treetops, to avoid potential radar detection and attack by Securitate forces who were still believed to be active. One helicopter carried the paratroopers, the other carried General Stănculescu, the judicial team, and a civilian figure from the new government, Ghilu Voican Voiculescu, who acted as the political commissar for the operation. The flight to Târgoviște, a distance of roughly 80 kilometers, took just over an hour. The mood was tense. No one spoke over the roar of the rotor blades. They carried the death sentences in a briefcase. At approximately 1 o'clock in the afternoon, the helicopters landed inside the Târgoviște garrison. The base commander, Colonel Andrei Kamenici, met them on the tarmac. The soldiers of the garrison had been guarding the Ceaușescus for 3 days. They were exhausted and nervous. Nicolae and Elena were being held in an officer's dormitory room, under constant guard. They had been given a medical checkup by Dr. Dolifan. Nicolae was 71 years old, a diabetic. Elena was 73. They were reported to be in good physical health, but were disoriented and defiant. They heard the helicopters land and believed their rescue had finally arrived. The paratroopers, led by Captain Boru, secured the perimeter. The makeshift courtroom was prepared in a small office down the hall from where the Ceaușescus were being held. It contained a simple table and a few chairs. A video camera was set up, operated by Colonel Ion Bayou of the Army's film studio. The new government wanted a record, proof that some form of legal process had been followed. Nicolae and Elena Ceaușescu were brought into the room. They looked worn but unbroken. He wore a black overcoat, she a patterned scarf and a dark coat. They sat down at the table opposite the judges. The trial began at approximately 1:30 in the afternoon. It would last 55 minutes. Judge Nister opened the proceedings. Prosecutor Gica Popa read the charges from a hastily typed document. There were 5 main accusations. First, genocide, under Article 357 of the Penal Code, for the killing of over 60,000 citizens during the Revolution, a number that was a wild exaggeration born from the chaos of the preceding days. Second, undermining state power, under Article 162. Third, itautasts, the destruction of public property. Fourth, undermining the national economy. And fifth, attempting to flee the country with over $1 billion deposited in foreign banks. From the very beginning, Nicolae Ceaușescu refused to recognize the court. I do not recognize this tribunal, he stated, striking the table with his hand. I will answer only to the Grand National Assembly. I am the President of Romania and the Commander-in-Chief of the Army. He called the proceedings a coup d'etat organized by traitors. Elena sat beside him, often whispering to him and occasionally lashing out at the prosecutors and judges with insults. When Gica Popa stumbled over a legal term, she snapped, "You can't even read." She called them vultures and turncoats. Prosecutor Popa pressed them about the orders to fire on demonstrators in Timișoara and Bucharest. Nicolae denied giving any such order. He claimed the chaos was the work of foreign agents and hooligans. Popa asked, "Who fired on the people in Palace Square?" Ceaușescu replied, "No one fired in Palace Square." This was a blatant falsehood. When asked about the 60,000 dead, he dismissed it as a lie. When asked about the $1 billion in foreign bank accounts, he called it a slander. "Show me the proof. Show me the bank statements," he demanded. No evidence for the money was ever presented, not at the trial, not in the years since. The charge was a fabrication meant to inflame public opinion. The appointed defense lawyers, Teodorescu and Lucescu, offered a strange defense. Instead of challenging the evidence or the legality of the court, they argued that their clients were not mentally responsible for their actions. They suggested the Ceaușescus suffered from a form of insanity induced by absolute power, and therefore should not be held accountable in the same way as ordinary citizens. Nicolae furiously rejected this. "I do not accept this defense," he said. "What you're saying is an insult." Their lawyers effectively acted as a second prosecution, agreeing with the charges and stating that the defendants' refusal to cooperate was proof of their guilt. If you value documented W2 and post-war history like this, subscribe. It's the best way to support our work. Now back to the story. The proceedings were a chaotic spectacle. The judges, prosecutors, and even the defense lawyers shouted questions. At one point, Elena Ceaușescu, who claimed to be a world-renowned chemist, questioned the legitimacy of her accusers. "You don't understand these things," she told them. The atmosphere in the cramped room was thick with hatred and fear. The soldiers lining the walls held their rifles tightly, watching the couple who had ruled their lives for as long as they could remember be verbally torn apart. After just under an hour, Judge Nister called a halt. The judicial panel left the room for 5 minutes to deliberate. The verdict had already been decided hours before in Bucharest. They returned. Colonel Ioan Nister read the sentence. For all crimes, the court unanimously sentenced the defendants, Nicolae Ceaușescu and Elena Ceaușescu, to death and the total confiscation of their property. A soldier entered the room to begin tying Nicolae's hands behind his back with a piece of white rope. He protested, "It is not permitted to tie my hands. It is an indignity." Elena began to cry out. She looked at one of the soldiers guarding her, a man named Gheorghe Tănase, and said, "You were like a son to me." The couple were told they would be executed separately. Elena screamed, "No, we want to die together. We fought together. We will die together." General Stănculescu, who was observing the entire scene from the doorway, granted this final request. He wanted the process finished quickly. They were led out of the building and into a small, frozen courtyard. The December air was cold. The destination was a plain brick wall next to a latrine. It was approximately 2:40 in the afternoon. The paratroopers were waiting. Captain Ionel Boru had selected his firing squad. He would fire, along with Sergeant Major Dorn Marion Kierlin and one other soldier, Jorgen Octavian, 3 men, 3 rifles. The other paratroopers, along with a handful of soldiers from the garrison, were ordered to stand back and form a perimeter. General Stănculescu remained near the building, an observer but not a direct witness to the final moment. As they were positioned against the wall, Nicolae Ceaușescu began to sing the opening verses of the Internationale, the socialist anthem, "Arise, you wretched of the earth." His voice was cut short. Some witnesses reported his final words were, "Long live the Socialist Republic of Romania, free and independent. Death to the traitors, history will avenge me." Captain Boru gave the order. The 3 paratroopers opened fire with their automatic weapons. The sound was deafening in the enclosed courtyard. Nicolae was hit first and collapsed, falling to his knees and then onto his back. Elena was spun around by the force of the bullets and fell beside him. The firing was intense and brief, lasting less than 20 seconds. Over 30 rounds were fired, riddling the bodies and the wall behind them. The cameraman, Colonel Bayou, was not fast enough. He was still moving from the courtroom down the corridor. He missed the moment of the execution itself. His camera began rolling just as the shooting stopped, capturing the immediate aftermath, the smoke from the rifles, the 2 bodies lying in a heap on the ground, and the bullet holes pocking the yellow bricked wall behind them. The time was 2:50 p.m., December 25th, 1989. A military doctor, Captain Moises, stepped forward to check the bodies and confirm the deaths. He performed his duty in silence. The courtyard was quiet except for the wind and the clicks of the camera. The entire process, from the reading of the verdict to the confirmation of death, had taken less than 15 minutes. The bodies of Nicolae and Elena Ceaușescu were wrapped in canvas sheets, loaded onto one of the helicopters, and flown back to Bucharest. The trial and execution were over. The aftermath for the participants was varied and complex. General Victor Stănculescu, the man who organized the trial, went on to serve as Minister of Economy. In 2008, he was convicted of manslaughter for his role in the brutal repression of the Timișoara protests in the days before Ceaușescu fell. He was sentenced to 15 years in prison and died in 2016. The prosecutor, Gica Popa, who had so aggressively demanded the death penalty, was promoted to the rank of general. On March 1st, 1990, less than 10 weeks after the trial, he was found dead in his office. The official cause was suicide. He left a note confessing his remorse over his role in the execution. Captain Ionel Boru, the man who led the firing squad, continued his military career and later went into business. He has given numerous interviews over the years, describing the events of that day with a calm, professional detachment. He has stated he was a soldier following orders and has no regrets. He believes the execution, however hasty, was necessary to end the bloodshed of the revolution. One of the other shooters, Dorn Marion Kierlin, later expressed deep regret and religious guilt for his actions. Their children were arrested that same day, Zoya, a mathematician, and Valentin, a nuclear physicist, were held for months and publicly vilified. They spent the rest of their lives trying to escape the shadow of their parents. The video of the trial and the images of the bodies were broadcast on Romanian television on Christmas night. The new government wanted to prove to the world, and especially to the remaining Securitate loyalists, that the Ceaușescus were dead and the old regime was finished. The raw, graphic footage shocked viewers globally and became an enduring symbol of the violent end of the Cold War in Eastern Europe. But the final act was shrouded in one last layer of secrecy. The bodies were not taken to a state morgue. They were transported to the Ghencea military cemetery in Bucharest under the cover of darkness on the night of December 25th. They were buried in separate, unmarked graves, several meters apart. To hide their identities, the crosses bore false names. Nicolae Ceaușescu was buried under the name Colonel Enescu. Elena Ceaușescu was buried as Colonel Petrescu. The state wanted them to disappear, not just from power, but from memory. The operation was overseen by Gelu Voican Voiculescu, who ensured the secret was kept. For years, their children, Zoya and Valentin Ceaușescu, fought a legal battle with the Romanian government. They questioned whether the bodies in the Ghencea cemetery truly belonged to their parents. They demanded exhumations and DNA testing to establish the truth. For 2 decades, their requests were denied by the authorities. The state that had executed them in a hurry was in no hurry to confirm their final resting place. The turning point came on July 21st, 2010. After years of legal persistence by the family, forensic scientists arrived at the Ghencea cemetery. The graves of Colonel Enescu and Colonel Petrescu were opened. The remains were exhumed. DNA samples were taken from the bodies and compared with samples from their son, Valentin, and their deceased son, Nicu. 4 months later, on November 3rd, 2010, the results were made public. The DNA analysis confirmed with certainty that the bodies were those of Nicolae and Elena Ceaușescu. After more than 20 years of doubt, the final secret was revealed. A few days later, they were reburied, this time together in a single grave, not far from their original burial spots. A new tombstone of red granite was placed over them, bearing their real names and their years of birth and death. The $1 billion was never located. The charge of 60,000 dead was proven to be false. The total death toll of the revolution was closer to 1,100. The trial lasted 55 minutes. The graves were lies for 21 years. The execution was an act of political necessity, a brutal conclusion to a brutal regime, carried out on a day meant for peace. The final word was left to the stone.